Thing you wanna do is
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
what should we do about makeup work?
What specifically?
I have 2 quizzes to make up, and I think you haven't counted that worksheet.
I haven't looked at the worksheets yet. You shouldn't have 2 quizzes because the second quiz was just today, wasn't it?
What was that?
All right, let's see. What do we need to talk about first? Several of you emailed me about wanting to see what you got wrong or something like that. And I don't think that I can change that on a quiz. I mean, I can check the box, but once the quiz is graded, I don't think that the software goes back and shows you later if I check the box. Now, there was one mistake on the key yesterday, and I did fix it. So if you took the quiz later, it worked out right. But I went through in Gradebook and gave a point to the people who had missed that. There were a couple people who missed it and got it counted right. I did not change it to wrong and take a point off. So you just kind of lucked out on that one. The quizzes, yesterday, because of the whole LMS messing up, there was not, some people couldn't get things done. So I extended yesterday's quiz till later. Now, if I understand LMS correctly, if I say a quiz is due by 3 o'clock, that doesn't mean they stop you at 3 o'clock. I think you can take it until I close the quiz. And most days I won't close the quiz, boom, right at 3 o'clock. So if you log on after 3 and the quiz is still accessible, it's your lucky day. If you log on after 3 and the quiz is no longer accessible, well, should have been on time. I mean, it's not like I'm not giving you all day, literally. If you have some special circumstances, like it's hard for me to imagine what special circumstances would make you not able to take a quiz when you're stuck home all day, every day. I don't know what. Your parents killed you because they couldn't take you anymore. Just kidding, just kidding. But yeah, if you have some special circumstances, let me know and we'll work something out. Just send me an email in a case like that and we'll see what we can do. I think those were the only things I needed to talk about right now. I missed a slide a couple of days ago. what I've got labeled here is jobs of bacteria because I really couldn't think of any better word for it. The things bacteria do in this world, you know, people ask, what's their purpose? What are they there for? Well, bacteria are here for several actually very important things. Perhaps one of the biggest, most important things is that bacteria decompose dead material. Okay, so in other words, they make things rot. Now, no one, and if you turn around and say, I do, then you're just being strange. No one likes rotting. It looks bad, it stinks, it's gross. Imagine a world where nothing rotted. Imagine if, that dead deer on the side of the road didn't get stinky and go away to a skeleton. Imagine if it just stayed there until the vultures or whatever ate it. There'd have to be a lot more vultures to take care of all the dead things on the side of the road. Imagine if those leaves in the forest fell and never decayed. They just kept piling up year after year after year. So no matter how yucky decay is, it's still incredibly important. Life would be so terribly much worse without it, without the decay. So a very important job of bacteria. Many bacteria are symbiotic right there. In other words, they work together with whatever they're living on or in. So you've all heard that cows have extra stomachs, which is perhaps a little bit, actually, I guess they have extra compartments in their stomach, but they have this compartment called the rumen. And there are bacteria that live in the rumen because nothing except bacteria can digest cellulose. So animals like cows and sheep, goats, deer that can eat grass and get fat on it, grow and get fat. We could eat grass, but we would probably slowly starve to death because most of it is cellulose and we can't digest the cellulose. How do cows do it? They have bacteria in their rumen that break down the cellulose into products that the cow, accidentally touching the keypad, not realizing it. They break down the cellulose into products that the plant can the cow can digest. Horses have a similar compartment, except it's at the end of their small intestine, between their small intestine and the large intestine. Beans and clover and alfalfa, not the character with the little curl in his hair, have bacteria on their roots that take nitrogen from the air that the plants cannot use to make protein, and then they change that into nitrate, the bacteria that is, which the plants can use. People, we have large bacteria living in our large intestine, amongst other places. I've used the word microbiome several times, and that has help keep us healthy by getting rid of or out-competing bad bacteria, and they help to break down certain products that we are not capable of digesting. They release a few vitamins. So there's a lot of symbiotic functions of bacteria. Termites eat wood, which we don't like if it's our house, but it is part of getting rid of all the dead wood in a forest. Termites can't digest wood, which is cellulose, so they have bacteria in their stomachs that can. All that's part of the symbiotic things that bacteria can do. Now, on the side, a relatively few number of bacteria can make us sick or cause infection. So that is a thing that bacteria do, and we really, really notice it, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the biggest percentage of things that bacteria do. So I just wanted to catch that card, wanted to mention that a little bit. And now we'll go back to where we had been. And about what, one more slide. There we go. Types of fungi. Now, as I told you yesterday, I'm not going to say a bunch about fungi. I took a whole class in mycology in college, had to do a collection. I can't remember now, 40 or 60 specimens of different kinds of fungi. I mentioned that the other day when I was talking about the slime mold that I had in my collection that grew on my carpet under the leak under the air conditioner way back in like what? That must have been maybe about 1980. But that was a long time ago, and most of my collection, if not all of the rest of it, has kind of deteriorated into nothingness. And I think, if I recall, I had to throw it away maybe 10 years ago. Other than the piece of carpet, because, hey, synthetic carpet never goes away. Anyway, so we'll look at some pictures of these different kind of fungi just to give you an idea what's going on. Some of them are pretty, some of them aren't not so much. So first of all, we've got on our list mushrooms. Mushrooms, you've seen lots of them. There's all different kinds of mushrooms. There are probably hundreds of kinds, and we're not going to look at all of them by any stretch of the imagination. But here is one sample of a kind of mushroom that there's a good chance that you may have seen in your yard, maybe even. These come out nice and these come out, let's see, pointer. These come out nice and fresh looking and white. And as they get older, they start to get gnarly and black looking and just kind of look like they're deteriorating along the edges. Those are called inky cap because the cap turns into ink. That's a pretty common kind of mushroom. I wanted to point out, some people talk about the difference between quote unquote mushrooms and toadstools, with mushrooms being edible and toadstools being poison. And even my professor for the mycology class I took in college said, don't eat mushrooms unless you absolutely positively are an expert and know that they are not toxic. Because some of the species of mushrooms, there's no one way to tell if a mushroom is a mushroom or a so-called toadstool poison. There is no one or any solid, always true trick that you can look for to know if it's safe or not. So when it comes to mushrooms, and there is one big exception coming up, except it's not an exception. I'll explain when we get there. When it comes to mushrooms, if you find one growing, don't eat it. Now, with that, I will tell you that this is a kind of mushroom that grows around here. If you see a mushroom like this, absolutely don't eat it. Now, the things that you're looking for on this mushroom are the little flecks on the cap. See, that isn't showing up as nicely as I would like it to, red on red. So these little, that's not showing up either. Just a second. These little flecks, isn't that cool? I did blue over yellow highlighting and got green. these little flecks, they're often described as looking like flecks of oatmeal stuck to the cap. Those little flecks and this flappy looking collar right under the cap are signs of the Amanita mushroom. They don't have to be red. I've seen them as white. I've seen them as green. I've seen them as yellow. And I'll just give you a hint. Amanita's nickname is the Death Angel. Once or twice in my life, I've heard news reports of people who found all these marvelous mushrooms growing out, and they fried them up and they ate it and they had the marvelous meal and they went to bed and never got up. You know, that somebody didn't report for work or no one answered the phone or something. So someone went to check on them and they found them comfortably dead in their bed. So Amanita, no, big no. And generally speaking, don't eat mushrooms that you find growing in the wild unless you're with an expert who knows what they're talking about when it comes to mushroom safety. Again, there is an exception to that, and we'll get to it in a little bit. Bracket fungi, I'm sure you've seen bracket fungi that grow on dead wood. It can be a standing up tree, it can be a fallen down branch, they can be big or little. So, you know, here is one oak leaf right here. So if that's one oak leaf, you can see that these are what, a quarter? Even the big ones are a quarter the size of an oak leaf. Some of them are very small. Some of them are just kind of bland, not any particular nice color. Some of them are quite attractive, quite colorful. But those are the shelf or bracket fungi, and they're pretty common. I'm sure you must have seen those around someplace. Generally, no matter how healthy the tree looks, if it's got one of these growing on, there is probably something wrong with it. If nothing else, then the fungus is wrong with it. I think I told you yesterday that I've only seen cup fungi a couple of times in my life. The ones I saw weren't quite so pretty as these. The best way I can think to describe them is they look like small inside out mushrooms. Most of them have a little bit of a stem, a little bit of a stalk, and then the cap, instead of, you know, kind of turning down, the cap turns up to make a cup. Some of them are pretty obvious cups, some of them are not quite as obvious. And again, here is one leaf laying on the log here, and that looks about the size of an apple leaf. So these are not very big. Some of them are really pretty. Some of them are less colorful. Again, there's clearly a cup. And if you see these in real life, they look kind of, I don't know, how do I describe it? Their texture looks kind of like maybe finger jello texture. Obviously not the shape you'd make finger jello. There's one particular kind, I think I had one of these in my collection, called bird nest fungi, which is a cup. The reason it gets the bird nest name is because it has these little spore cases that look like bird eggs in it. That's kind of a cool one. Now, you don't have to know this, but these cup fungi are kind of fungi called sac fungi. And the mushrooms, back that we looked at earlier, mushrooms are called club fungi. Now, club fungi means that their spores form on the end of a club-like structure. At least in somebody's imagination, it was a club-shaped structure. Although I'm telling you, club fungi sounds like it would be where all the trendy fungi hang out. Sac fungi are called sac fungi because their spores, instead of being on a structure, their spores are in a little sac-shaped thing. Okay, so the reason I tell you this, the cup fungi are a kind of sac fungi, as are the morels. Now, almost everyone in Michigan that I know that hunts mushrooms in the spring says they hunt mushrooms and they call these morel mushrooms, except for they're not mushrooms. Morels are a sac fungi and mushrooms are a club fungi. So you can call them that's not right, just a minute. You can call them morel mushrooms if you want, but they're not a mushroom. They're actually just morels. And that's the moral of the story. They have this stalk, and then they have this kind of looks like a sponge on a stick. And these are edible. There is a false morel, but as far as I've ever been able to figure out, the false morel does not live around here. They are edible. People hunt them in the spring. And this is the one that may sound like an exception to don't eat anything you find growing in the wild, mushroom you find growing in the wild, but it's not really an exception because it's not really a mushroom. Every year I find 2 or 3 of these growing in my yard. Sadly, it's only 2 or 3, not enough even for one good meal. I keep wishing that they would grow more of them, but they haven't in 20 years. Puffballs. Now let's see. These are maple seedling leaves. To give you an idea of size here, puffballs can get pretty big. Puffballs like to grow around my place, and I frequently find them as big or bigger than a football. So these can get to be pretty good size. Now, I'll show you some others in a little bit that don't look like this, but this is a common puffball around this part of the world. If you were to take them when they're all white like that and cut them open, they're full of white flesh, which is edible if you like a strong mushroom taste. As they get older and dry out, that white flesh turns into a bunch of dusty, powdery spores, and then I suppose they're still edible, but they would taste nasty. The big ones like this don't usually grow in the clumps. At least the big ones, the football-size shaped ones, don't usually grow in clumps. But there are other puffballs that are much smaller. Some of them do grow in clumps. Some of them have all those little spiky structure things all over them. Kind of look cool, I guess. And for those of you who don't know, they're called puffballs because after they're white and pretty-ish, if you think that's pretty, when they turn yellow or brown and dried out, then every time they get stepped on or bumped or a good wind hits them, they release this cloud of dust. In other words, they puff, and the cloud of dust is spores that float away in the wind and land on the ground someplace else. And if there's food for them, then they can grow and make a new puffball plant. But the puffball is, as I think I told you earlier about mushrooms, that the mushroom is to the fungus as the apple is to the tree. There is still a lot of hyphae growing under the ground, and the puffball is just the fruiting structure. A few years ago, I mowed a hayfield with a bunch of dried out puffballs in it. I'd be mowing along. I use a hay mower that cuts the hay and then runs it through 2 crusher rollers to squeeze the plants, squeeze the juice out so they'll dry faster, so the hay would dry faster. And I couldn't see the puffballs in the tall grass, but every time I'd hit one with the mower, there'd be this big red cloud of smoke come out. First time I hit one, I thought the machine would burn up. Okay, that was a worthless story, sorry. Mildew. Molds and mildew. Yeast was on our list here, so you listen maybe. Yeast was on the list. It's kind of hard to get a picture of yeast. Yeast are single-celled fungi. If you want to see the closest you're going to see to yeast, ask your mom next time she makes bread or something with yeast in it to show you a couple granules of it. But those are freeze-dried yeast. Yeast can exist in a dormant state. When you put it in the bread dough or whatever, it starts to grow, single-celled fungus. The reason we grow it there is it breaks down the carbohydrates, some of the carbohydrates, the starch in the bread, and in the process, it gives off carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide gas is what makes the bread rise. Instead of being one solid massive dough, there are millions of little tiny air bubbles in it. And then mold and mildew is the last on the list. And I have no doubt that you have seen mold. Some of you have even seen it, heaven forbid, in a dish in the back of the refrigerator that got overlooked for too long. Just wanted to point out that some of the mildews and so on can grow on plants. This looks like it's probably a squash plant or some kind of a cucumber maybe. And squash and cucumbers are susceptible to powdery mildew, all that little white stuff growing on it. It means that wherever this plant was grown, it was either watered too much or it was an excessively moist summer. And you can quit watering, but if it rains too much, you can't stop it from raining, of course. So that's just an example of a mildew growing on a plant as a parasite of sorts. Some plants are particularly susceptible. Lilacs get a powdery mildew, peaches and cherries, I think. Like I said, squash and cucumber kind of plants. Some plants are particularly susceptible to that. Any questions about the different kinds of fungi? Obviously, you don't have to memorize the pictures.
Wait, what are the 2 kinds of fungi again?
Well, there's actually 3 kinds. There's club fungi and sac fungi, and then a group called, well, they don't have a general name. They're called the deuteromycetes. There's the ascomycetes, which are the sac fungi, and the basidiomycetes, which are the club fungi, and the deuteromycetes, which are a class that we can't figure out whether they're ascomycetes or basidiomycetes. But the 2 general categories, sac fungi and club fungi. All right, let's just look at the kinds of plants. And this is not all of them, but I'll get you some pictures of these and we'll look at some of the specifics tomorrow. So notice that we divide this into 3 groups. Highlighter. We've got plants that don't have vascular tissue. Vascular is water conducting. And then we have plants that have vascular tissue, but no seeds. And then we've got plants with vascular tissue and seeds. So those are the 3 groups. No vascular tissue, no water conducting tissue, and then water conducting tissue but no seeds, and then vascular tissue and seeds. So plants that don't have vascular tissue have to be very, very short because water can't soak up very far. There are, the only one it says here is mosses. There is another category called liverwort, which sounds weird, liverwort, hey? But they're just kind of weird. Well, they are weird looking, but not in a gross way, I don't think. I'll show you some pictures of those tomorrow. I'm sure you've seen mosses, whether you've seen a liverwort or not. You might have seen it, but you almost certainly didn't know what it was. Plants that have vascular tissue but no seeds, ferns, you've seen a fern, and horsetails would be another good example. And you've probably seen horsetails, but whether or not you knew that they were called horsetails is another thing. I'll show you a picture of those tomorrow. And a lot of you, all by yourself and all by your little old lonesome and your little old homesome, will say to yourself, oh, that's what those are. I've seen those. And then with vascular seeds, ginkgo, and yes, this is the ginkgo biloba. Conifers, which are what we usually call evergreens or Christmas trees. And then the flowering plants, which includes almost every plant you're used to seeing other than the conifers. There are a lot of plants that you don't think are flowering plants, but most, if I look out the window right now, I see grass and several kinds of trees, and my neighbor has some white pines. Everything I can see out my window right now is a flowering plant, except for the white pines. Yes, the grass is a flowering plant. All of the trees in my yard, well, I actually have some evergreens, but I can't see them from here. All of the trees I can see in my yard are flowering plants. They're by far and away the most common, even though some of the flowers aren't very flowery. You wouldn't even know they were flowers if you didn't know what to look for. So I will get some pictures of those things for tomorrow, show you some examples. Some of it's cool, some of it's just boring, but we'll look at them, and that'll be all for today. Make sure that you get the quiz finished. And again, if it's after 3 and I haven't closed it yet, you're in luck. Take it. If it's after 3 and I have closed it, sorry, you should have been on time. All right, anything else you need to know? Well, all right then. Have a good afternoon.